Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg.
And I'm Jessica. And Meg and I have been friends since 1982. We got through middle school and high school together here in New York City, where we still live.
And where we podcast about New York City in the 80s. I do rip from the headlines.
And I do pop culture.
So this week, Jessica, I was
Yes.
thinking a lot about reviews because you talked about a review last week. And, you know, one of my favorite episodes is when you went really deep on the Moose Murders review.
By going deep, you mean losing my mind, cackling. Yes.
Yes. And I was thinking about my experience with reviews, which is mostly as an artist, as a performer. Reviews affect the business so profoundly. A good review will mean, oh my God, you're going to sell more tickets. A bad review means you will most probably close early because that's just the way the business is structured, which is an enormous amount of responsibility for one person's opinion. All right, so we'll just leave that there for a second. Like one person, really, New York Times, whoever reviews it for the New York Times, is that one person's one experience, that one evening, right? I think as consumers, we're really lucky if we can find, and not just like theater, but like movies and food as well, and restaurants, if you can find a reviewer who really speaks to you so you feel like I can trust that person, that's awesome. I don't really know people who say that all the time, though, like, oh, I'll do whatever so-and-so says, right? Anyway, I lay that out. What I was thinking about this week is, I guess because of the times that you've been reading reviews, something I'd never thought about before is that it's also a historical document.
Yeah.
So whatever we think of that ephemeral moment in time is now in stone because of one person's experience one evening. There's something about that I'm not really excited about, or I just go like, all right, please, you know, if you are a critic, if you are a reviewer out there, realize this isn't, sure, you know that you're affecting business, but also realize like you've got like a bigger responsibility than even that. One thing I was going to ask you, because right before we got on, you said you saw Death Becomes Her. Did you know it had awful reviews?
Yes.
And what did you just tell me before you sat down?
I said, I have not laughed that hard in the theater in a very long time. And I will even expound on that. But I have two quick things to say on the subject of reviews and critics. Number one, on my flight to London, I watched a movie with Ian McKellen called The Critic. And it's about exactly what you're talking about and the effect of one critic and the effect of what that critic does to other people and how it bounces back to the critic. So it's very dark. It's kind of amusing, but it's dark. I recommend it.
Cool.
Good movie. Number two, the way that you are describing theatrical reviews is very intriguing to me because, you know, I live in the land of book reviews. And the thing that's so weird about book reviews is that the book reviewer, in my mind, has become defanged and declawed to some degree because you have Goodreads and Amazon and every person weighs in and you get these numbered ratings because you have these large groups of people. And in my experience, like the only way that I could handle it, because like I had like with my second, I had really good critical reviews, but the average person was lambasting me. And the only way to handle it was to completely own it and use it as a brand.
Right.
But it's harsh because you have so many people, and like with movies with Rotten Tomatoes, like you have these amalgams of human beings, whereas in the theater, you've got the one.
Also, there's a huge difference between theater and books and movies because whether one person feels that way about the theater, it's gone. Poof.
It's ephemeral.
Yeah. And you can actually read a book that got a bad review and have a different opinion. And you can go see a movie that had a bad review in 1975 and see it now and go, that was ahead of its time and
Mhm.
nobody gave it credit.
Yep.
But now we can see it now and realize it was kind of brilliant. That can exist for theater.
No, I get it. I think that is fascinating, and yeah, you live and die by this one person. So, yeah, so I just saw Death Becomes Her, and I went because Nick had free tickets. We were planning to leave after the first act. We had gone to dinner. We had our chat ski. We were sitting down like, we'll turn our noses up at this. And by the way, we were in the fourth row center.
Ah,
Like we had
love it.
unbelievable tickets. The opening number, we looked at each other and just started gagging with laughter.
That's awesome.
And we looked in the playbill, and the people responsible for the lyrics were comedians. I don't know if the opening number is something that you can see online yet, but I will say this, and it's very in keeping with everything that I've ever presented on this podcast. It is the campiest, gayest, most self-referentially camp show I have ever seen, and that includes drag shows that I have been to, and it's so witty, and the entire audience was rolling out of their seats. So, I gotta say, if I can do anything to counteract the New York Times, oh my God, what a hoot.
Awesome. And now, forever, this podcast will exist and someone will hear it and know that Death Becomes Her wasn't an awful show
It
because you loved it.
We couldn't stop laughing.
Have you ever had a dispute with your neighbor?
I have had problems with noise above me.
I mean, a violent dispute.
Amazingly, no.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yes. I understand that the likelihood was that there were, punches thrown, but
Look,
no.
we all in New York City, we live really close to each other and we live really close to strangers. And the idea that we would all be like happy go lucky all the time, like kind of slim. So it's really remarkable that there isn't more dispute, I would say.
I'll tell you something.
Yeah.
Having been a mediator in the New York court system, I can tell you that the number one dispute that happened frequently to me is noise above. Is there a carpet?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that you have to have a certain amount of floor space covered. And people, perfectly nice people, have no awareness of what they're doing in their apartments. So, like, there was a couple above me, they had the proper coverings on the floor, but where they didn't have any rugs, there was a toddler who was throwing blocks on the floor. Now, how do you deal with that? What do you say? Like, it's time to be better parents and not total dicks who don't pay attention to what's happening in your apartment. You can't. It's
Yeah.
really difficult. I have actually had, as the neighbors across from me, from my time as a child, frequently elderly people. The people across the hall from me growing up were like my grandparents. When I lived on 90th, the people across from me were in their 80s, and like they looked after me and I looked after them. So like that's been my experience with
Yeah.
the people who I actually
Good.
open my door to look at.
Thank you for that.
Yes, I'm happy to share it with you.
My sources are the New York Times, Vanity Fair, and FBI Files.
Da, da,
It's on
da.
YouTube. YouTube has all kinds of offerings. I'll just say that. But it was really cool, like to hear interviews with the actual people who are part of this story.
I'm deeply into that.
Okay. At 3:30 a.m. on February 26th, 1988, 22-year-old officer Edward Byrne.
Oh, like Ed Burns?
Yeah,
Weird.
except
Except
not.
not. Okay, well, he's missing an S.
He sat in his patrol car on 107th Avenue and Inwood Street in the South Jamaica neighborhood of Queens. He was keeping an eye on the house of Mr. Arjun, who was a local Guyanese immigrant who was a fleet manager with a laundry company. He had a pretty good job.
Mm-hmm.
And he had bought a house in South Jamaica, Queens. Now, over the preceding months, Mr. Arjun had called the police a number of times to complain about crack dealers doing business right in front of his home. Then, on November 10th, Mr. Arjun's house was firebombed. Claude Johnson, who is 28, and Robert Webster, who is 17, threw Molotov cocktails into Mr. Arjun's home, presumably in response to Mr. Arjun's complaints. So retaliation.
By crack dealers.
We assume. This is all, we just assume that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That morning, Mr. Arjun told of how he'd heard his dogs barking at 4:25 a.m. and then 4 flaming bottles bounced off his house. Now, they didn't catch fire to anything.
What a miracle.
Maybe everything's going to be okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then 2 hours later, he saw Claude and Robert approaching his home, each with a flaming glass jar. This is a quote from Mr. Arjun. "I shouted to my family to wake up. I ran to the window where this gentleman, Robert Webster, who again was 17, was trying to open my window. I looked at his face. He looked at me. He was determined to burn my house." As a result of all this, there was some damage to the house, and Mr. Arjun was burned a little bit. But other than that, thank God, everything was okay. Then on November 25th, so this is just a couple weeks later, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of that happened on November 10th. Now November 25th. Thomas Mustafa Godbolt, who
That's
worked—
a name.
It is. Who worked for Fat Cat Nichols, approached—
Is that a person or a company?
It's a person.
Okay.
He's going to come back.
Okay.
But Mustafa, that was his nickname, approached Mr. Arjun on the street and said he and his family, Mr. Arjun and his family, would be killed if they didn't move out of the neighborhood.
Oh, my God.
So, oh my God, things are escalating, right? So in response to that, the police posted a 24-hour guard in front of his house. And things actually calmed down for a bit, as calm as they could be in this neighborhood, which, as you might have guessed, was teeming with drug dealers. Back in the late 70s, Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols and Pappy Mason met in state prison. Both were from South Jamaica, Queens. Now, Fat Cat was known for being a shrewd businessman, and Pappy, on the other hand, was really volatile. He just was going to react with violence at any given opportunity. After both these men were paroled, Pappy worked for Fat Cat as a security man, making $1,000 a week. But after a couple of years, he left Fat Cat to start his own drug gang called the Bebos in the 40s projects. Now, you may think that Fat Cat, who made $20 million a year and wore a rabbit fur coat and gold jewelry and was the undisputed drug boss of Jamaica, Queens, would have an issue with that.
Someone cutting in on his fur coat money.
Yeah, competition. But he really wasn't. When the two men were coming up in the drug trade, it was about cocaine and hash and heroin. But once crack made its debut, the market exploded. There were enough people desperately addicted to crack and more than enough money to go around. So
the great leveler.
It
Crack,
was like
the great leveler, just what you've always wanted.
like, whatever, the more the merrier. I mean, and it was all in the family as well.
Okay.
Fat Cat's sister, Viola, dated Pappy. One time, Viola smoked $10,000 of Pappy's crack, and Fat Cat gave Pappy a free kilo of coke to smooth things over.
Who can
So
live and smoke that much crack? What is this woman made of? Jesus
and
Christ.
Pappy's mother, Claudia, Mrs. Bebo, was in on it as well. She ran the business whenever her son had to go to jail. So business was booming, and these men were living large. Drug dealing was so normalized in this neighborhood that it seemed unlikely that law enforcement would get a handle on it. And there was a lot of violence, but mostly against people who stood in the way of business
Right.
or incidental to being high on crack.
Mhm.
But then something happened,
Oh, God.
and the drug dealers just pushed it too far. When Fat Cat was out on parole, his headquarters were at Big Mac's Deli, and it was raided by the police. And he was caught red-handed with 2 ounces of cocaine, 6 ounces of high-grade heroin, several pounds of marijuana, police scanners, scales, a money-counting machine, $30,000 in cash, an Austrian semi-automatic, and 2 loaded pistols.
Wait, I have to just stop you for a second. When you first started describing what he had on him, I was imagining the drugs like in pockets in his big fur coat. And when you got to scales, I was like, what? He's got what else? It's like, remember Captain Caveman could like pull a bicycle out of his hair? That's what I'm imagining Fat Cat
No, what you
doing.
need to imagine is the back room at a
Right.
deli.
No, I clued into that.
All right.
It took me a second.
So that's a lot.
This is a pretty
And, like,
bad
when I said
evidence.
caught red-handed, like, I mean, there wasn't a secret exit. I mean, he was just there with all of that incredibly incriminating stuff. He was arraigned and shockingly able to post bail. I mean, not shocking that he had all the money, but shocking that they let him post bail. Oy, and he went home.
At least he wasn't a flight risk. They knew he wants to be near his mummy and his $10,000 of crack sister. I'm never gonna get over that, by the way, because I want us to figure out exactly how much that is
Like,
on the market.
visually?
Yeah, how many ounces of crack that is, and the average person, how much of that can you do before you drop dead? Like, what are we actually dealing with here? Because it seems insane. I'm a little obsessed.
When he checked in with his parole officer, Brian Rooney, he lied and said the arrest was all a misunderstanding. He'd just been at the deli to buy a sandwich. Rooney arrested him on the spot for a parole violation. You are not allowed to lie to your parole officer.
Oh, big mistake.
And Fat Cat went back to jail. And this pissed him off. And he arranged for Rooney to be gunned down. And the word on the street was that Pappy did the hit for him.
Oh my God, he killed him.
Oh, yeah. So Fat Cat in jail,
Arranges for Pappy to do the deed.
yes, kill his parole officer.
Oh my. Well, and as though you're not going to get caught for that. Like, come on. So Fat Cat seems to have been really like not so much of a, a mastermind and more like, oh, I live in Cracktown. I'm going to sell some crack.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a loss of perspective. I mean, no, I mean it. I mean, I think they'd been able to get away with whatever they wanted for so long. He was just able to post bail, which is crazy
Yes.
considering what the charges were.
Yes. I just want you to know how genteel that sounded. And it was so charming.
Well,
Okay.
and also remember, I mean, just because it's interesting for the story, I think that Fat Cat, as you brought up, he's the one who's kind of just the businessman, and Pappy's the one who's always like going off like that.
He's like, I gotta go off today. Like slinging his I don't know.
He has a violent
bag
temper.
over his shoulder. Like, today's the day I go do the murders or whatever.
No, I think it's more for Pappy. It wasn't like a job as much as he's just like, you piss me off, you're dead.
So he's like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas.
Yes.
He's the cuckoo bird.
Thank you. He's the
Okay.
cuckoo bird who's just like, you talking to me? No, that's a different movie.
That's a different movie, but am I funny? Am I a
funny?
clown?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's it.
got
Okay,
it.
okay. All right. There was a hung jury for Pappy's first trial. all right, because he was arrested for Rooney's murder.
Murder, most foul.
But there is a hung jury, so he's out while they prepare for the second trial. And while Pappy was awaiting his second trial, he was hanging out on a South Jamaican corner with some of his gang members. He was drinking beer. Robert Kish, a police officer, approached him and told him to put his beer away. You're not allowed to have open
No
containers.
open containers. I'm sure this didn't go over very well.
Well, Pappy refused. And now I want you to picture Pappy, Rastafarian, with long dreadlocks and gold teeth, one of which had a shamrock carved in it.
I need help. How could you have not started with that? Good God. I had a completely different visual here. Oh my God. Phenomenal. Okay. And what was that movie? It's going to come to me, but like Gary Oldman plays a crazy drug guy with like one dead eye, but like Rasta locks and like gold teeth.
I believe
I gotcha. I'm starting to have a very potent visual.
All right. Kish, the police officer, grabbed Pappy by his hand and forced him to throw the beer in the trash.
Oh, girl, you made a big mistake.
Pappy was humiliated in front of his crew.
That's not going to stand.
Then, when Kish found a derringer in Pappy's boot, he was able to arrest him. And back to jail he went. Very disgruntled. So we have two very grumpy drug dealers who feel...
That's like the best children's book ever. The very grumpy drug dealer.
And they feel disrespected specifically by law enforcement.
Okay.
And they have every capability of running their businesses from inside prison.
Mm-hmm.
Now, remember young Edward Byrne sitting in a car outside Mr. Arjun's home.
Oh, God.
He was reading the Daily News when a guy tapped on the passenger side window. When he turned to see who it was, two other men blew out the driver's side.
Oh, my God.
With 5 rounds from a .38 caliber nickel-plated gun.
Oh, my God.
The cold-blooded murder of a police officer in the wake of the assassination of a parole officer.
Oh, my God.
Pushed law enforcement into high gear. There were so many suspects and so many motives. It made everything very complicated. Fortunately, they managed to bug the right person. Remember Viola? You sure do.
I sure do remember Viola.
Viola Nichols, Fat Cat's sister and Pappy's girlfriend. Viola loved to talk on the phone. She rarely hung it up. So if somebody dropped by, she would just leave it on the table.
Oh, my God.
And they bugged her. So ultimately, that acted as the recording device for the conversation going on in the room, in addition to the conversations she's having to everybody who calls her.
Viola, a live wire.
And she knew the ins and outs of both Pappy and Fat Cat's operation.
Wait, did they make her into an informant, or did they just bug her phone?
Do you want to know?
I'm sorry, I got excited. What? Yes, clearly I do.
At this point in the story, they have simply bugged her phone.
Okay.
And they are gathering information, and they're gathering a lot of information.
I got
because also, Pappy and Fat Cat call her all the time.
I'm sorry. I have to get a tissue. I just laughed so hard. Hold on. It's just the way you say Pappy and Fat Cat. They just happened, and then they stepped on the ping pong ball.
Stop. Okay.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm so enjoying this. Thank you.
All right. They got enough information to arrest her.
Okay.
Not a shock. And when she was arrested, she went kicking and screaming and spitting.
Quite the lady.
Yes. And then she became an informant.
Okay.
Oh, this is really cool. You're going to love this. She helped translate the bugged conversations. It turns out they spoke in a kind of pig Latin that she deciphered.
Oh, my God.
I'm going to try and say, I mean, it was written phonetically.
Okay.
Stidize strididong meant stay strong. You know what it kind of reminded me of? Like Ubby Dubby
Right?
from Zoom.
Yes.
Okay, so she was able to go, let me just write out exactly what we were saying. She was put in witness protection for her efforts, as was Mr. Arjun, although he was later arrested for speeding and resisting arrest in Spokane, Washington. Mr. Arjun, I mean, he was definitely a victim, but he was also kind of a hot mess himself. I mean, not because of drugs or anything. He was kind of like a dramatic guy. Anyway, we'll get back to that.
Can we just have no more dramatic guys, please?
Fat Cat is still in federal custody.
Interesting.
Yeah, you can follow him on Instagram.
Stop it.
This is true.
He's on Instagram.
He is on Instagram. Pappy Mason is serving a life sentence in Allenwood. His mom, Mrs. Bebos, served 8 years for drug trafficking. The 4 men who murdered Edward Byrne were apprehended and convicted. Now, who do you think ordered the hit and why?
On Byrne?
Yeah.
Okay, let me think. Okay, is it either Pappy or
Fat Cat?
Yes. Okay, it's one of them.
Those are your choices.
Okay, let me think. I'm going to go with Pappy.
Okay, what was his motive?
Because he'd been humiliated. I'm thinking that he had more of a beef because it was personal.
It was Pappy. And it had nothing to do with Mr. Arjun. See, that's what confused people for a while. They just kept going, well, he was guarding Mr. Arjun's home, so it must be a connection. Nope.
No, is it because of the yanking the dreadlocks?
He was pissed at police officer Robert Kish's disrespect when he was drinking a beer in an open container. So
I paid attention.
Well done, Jessica.
Thank you.
He told his soldiers to assassinate any police officer in retaliation. And poor Edward Byrne was a sitting duck. Interestingly, it turns out, how about this, that Robert Webster, the 17-year-old who was sentenced to life for firebombing Mr. Arjun's house, was falsely convicted.
Stop it.
He had an alibi that was ignored by the police and the DA, and he was released after 34 years. His sentence was unusually harsh because Edward Byrne's murder occurred while he was awaiting trial.
Oh, my God.
So just, oh, my God.
What a
awful.
mess.
Yeah. And Edward Byrne became a martyr and a symbol for the war on drugs. Reagan called his family to offer condolences. Bush carried Byrne's badge with him during his 1988 presidential campaign. A school, a park, an avenue, and a baseball field had been named after him. And the United States Department of Justice established the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program, which helps focus on officer safety.
Wow.
Now, remember, I told you off mic that this was a requested story. And when I first started looking into it, I was like, oh my God, this is such a web of crazy. I don't even know, like, you're going down one path and then they're like, no, wrong path. Try starting over and go the other way. I'm like, really? I think it's a story about location.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's about when a neighborhood becomes the
epicenter.
Thank you. Yes, the hot seat. Which of course also raises the question, why this neighborhood, why that drug at that time? And I know that that's a whole second episode about what is it was South Jamaica?
Yeah, South Jamaica, Queens. There were projects there. And drugs definitely had a hold there before crack happened. And when crack happened, everything exploded.
Do you remember, it's just occurred to me 3 seconds ago, as we're talking about crack, as one does. And you were saying that there was enough money to go around. There wasn't worry about competition because it was so highly addictive. So many people were addicted that it was just like printing money. Do you remember
The
in the
demand was so high.
do you remember in the late 80s that a derivative of crack was created that was called ice?
I do not.
Ice. And I remember reading about this in the bookstore at Kenyon because it was like a cover story for Time magazine or something. And ice was so addictive and so deadly that drug dealers stopped making it because they were killing their market. And that it was like the number of people who tried ice once and died was so high that I've never heard of drug dealers rolling back a product,
Right.
but they were like, market research says this is a
not good
bad
for the
idea.
long run.
Yes.
That is wild.
Ice. Yes, that was pretty insane. Hmm. But yeah, these guys, but what's also interesting for me hearing this story is yes, it's all about location, location, location. It's also two crazy motherfuckers and how much havoc they were able to wreak. That these guys, these two men who were obviously unhinged and had a lot of energy.
But, things were going fine for so long, and then it was when they started killing police officers that everything went south. That's when basically law enforcement was like, "Yeah, no, 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 we cannot have that."
Mm.
But
It
then as a result of them finally getting a handle on things, at least somewhat, you've got politicians coming in going, "Oh, yes, that was my idea. I'm going to
Mhm.
take credit for that. Thank you very
I'll
much.
carry
War
your
on drugs.
badge.
That was because of me.
Wa
Swear to God."
War on drugs. Back
And
back
it's
to
like,
Nancy and Mr. T.
ugh, I kinda hated that, like, these guys swoop in and sort of take advantage of some poor dead 22-year-old.
Everyone needs a flag to wave, Meg.
I don't like it.
I don't like it either. Before we move on,
Yeah.
the character I was thinking about was Gary Oldman as Drexel Spivey from True Romance,
Oh, my
one of my
lord.
favorite movies. And I kept thinking, like, it's a movie with Brad Pitt. And Brad Pitt is the stoner roommate who's smoking weed through a honey bear. Remember this? But that was like,
Yeah.
those are like my big mental images. But yeah, Gary Oldman, what a weird, weird character. And just a reminder, though it's not the 80s, it's 1993. What a great movie. I have an engagement question for you.
Okay.
If you could change anything about your appearance, what would it be?
Right now, currently,
Yeah. Or you could say something from when you were a teenager. It doesn't matter. Like, however you want to answer the
I
question.
just wanna lose some weight.
Okay.
Sorry to be boring.
It's not boring. It's it's pretty much every person on the planet. And
Doesn't that make
we
it
all
boring?
no, it's we all share the struggle. It's a shared
Alright.
identifiable struggle. So 30 days ago, we lost the Bride of Wildenstein, Catwoman, the Lion Queen, Jocelyn
Oh,
Wildenstein.
no, I had no idea.
I am so surprised because you always know like you know these. I'm shocked.
I have a phone with alerts,
I know you
and,
do.
the whole '80s tie-in thing. I'm like, "Why didn't they tell me?"
Who knows?
I should be getting alarms about that.
Indeed. Well, it is a callback, but I couldn't let her death go unnoted.
Wonderful. So we're revisiting
We're revisiting, and what we're going to
Jocelyn.
visit this time is how Jocelyn's journey is really about how plastic surgery took hold of the 80s. Plastic surgery, not new. There's evidence that in ancient Egypt, people were altering their features. But in the modern day, World War I created so much physical devastation for the soldiers and with faces blown off, all
Mm.
kinds of hideousness. And by the way, World War One, also because of people being maimed, Joseph Pilates created Pilates exercise and the machine as a rehab for World War One soldiers.
Oh my goodness.
So in much the same way, those same soldiers had to have their faces put back together.
Oh my.
Now, I've seen these before actually. There's that store Oddities in the East Village.
Sure.
And I've seen the actual like wax half masks, and they almost look like Phantom of the Opera for
Yeah.
people who have had parts of their
The
faces blown off.
character on Boardwalk
Yes, yes,
Empire.
yes. Yes, exactly. But for the rest of the face that could be salvaged in New Zealand, Sir Harold Gillies performed the very first successful reconstructive surgery on Walter Yeo. It was in 1920. In 1924, the first formal training for plastic surgery started at Johns Hopkins in the United States. Another little side note about plastic surgery, the other reason that there was research, and this is in the 1800s, into plastic surgery, although it was not known as such, was because of syphilis. Syphilis was rampant. Yes.
Doesn't it do something awful to your
Rots
nose
your
or
nose right
something?
off your
Rots your
face.
nose. Okay.
So there was actually an episode in the show The Nick. I don't know if you ever saw that with Clive
No.
Owen. Great TV show, a bit graphic, but a woman who he used to know. And so what the story I'm about to tell you from the show is exactly what really happened. Her husband had been seeing prostitutes and brought syphilis home. She was this, upper class woman who had to wear, again, sort of a precursor of what the World War One veterans were wearing. She had a prosthetic, like a plastic nose that was affixed to her face with an elastic band. So what they did on the show is exactly what they did in real life, which was a horrible procedure where a graft was taken from the arm, but the way that it was done was you had to have your arm suspended over your head and a flap of the skin removed from your arm attached to your face, and you had to have that for months and months and months for the skin to take onto your face from
Oh
your
my
arm.
God. Divorce him.
Well, clearly. And then the best that could happen is sort of a crude nose, but at least the hole was covered.
Can we just say, thank God for modern medicine?
Thank God for modern medicine.
Jesus.
So plastic surgery, not new. In 1924, rhinoplasties became quite popular. Do you remember the TV show The Swan, that hideousness? I think it was the 90s, but it might have been the aughts.
Yes. When it was a reality show
Yeah. Mhm.
where a woman who wanted to have plastic surgery came in and they just redid her top to bottom.
It was worse than that. It was a beauty contest. It was an ugly contest. You had to be judged awful enough looking to merit getting the full makeover.
Oh, God.
And it was two women, and they couldn't have a mirror during the entire time, and they were, made to lose weight, and they had hair plugs, and they had nose jobs, they had their ears pinned back, they had their teeth completely capped and redone. And then the final episode was the unveiling, and usually they like crumble to the ground fainting with gratitude. And many women on the show left their husbands who were like snaggletooth freaks and they were like, I'm so hot and you're freaky. I'm out. That was the Swan. But in
It's so dark.
It's so dark. In 1924, the New York Daily Mirror ran a contest. Who is the homeliest girl in New York City? And she got a nose job. That was the contest. So if you look at movie stars from the 30s, the 40s, definitely in the 50s, they all have the same nose. And that's because there was one nose job.
Yeah.
That's it. So Jocelyn Wildenstein was a beautiful woman. She was from Switzerland. She did not come from money, but boy, did she want it. So she went out and she swanned herself And she became, among other things, a big game hunter and a pilot. So
Hmm.
clearly her desire, the kind of man she wanted, was very specific. At the slightly later age of 38, in 1978, she found her guy, Alec Wildenstein, heir to a $10 billion fortune. That's 1978 billions. They hook up, they get married. 1 year later, she complains to her husband about the bags under her eyes.
Mm.
That's the last year of the 70s. The 70s was also when plastic surgery really entered the common consciousness because breast implants were starting. It was coming out of the closet because people also wanted the idea of looking like a movie star was becoming more attainable because of this. So in the 1980s, plastic surgery went wild. However, the techniques, and not so good.
No.
So here's what was happening in the 80s with plastic surgery: facelifts, subfacial dissection, which means you lift the skin independent of the muscles and connective tissue. That resulted in what is known as the wind tunnel look. My brother and I used to sit in the car with our parents who would, like, to their own horror, laugh at this. And like a lot of kids, I'm sure, of the 70s and 80s, we would pull our faces back and say, "Look, Mom, we're Mrs. Martin."
No.
She's like, "Stop it. Ha ha ha. Stop it. Ha ha ha." Then there was SMAS lifting, where you manipulated the muscles and the nerves to affect the look of the skin. So now you're cutting into muscle and not
Oh
knowing
my
what's
God.
going to
Oh my
happen.
God.
Finally, and this is where things start to get a little less haphazard, you've got ligament manipulation. Ligaments in the mid face are manipulated so you have a more natural look instead of pulling everything up from the top like you're making a bed. Nose jobs, as we know, were old hat at this point. There was the beginning of skin resurfacing. So now you go for a facial and you get a nice little sandblasting. Nay, nay. Back when Jocelyn was at it, you had laser peels where layers and layers, you wound up looking like a cheese grater had been taken to your skin. And the result was shiny. There's a shiny, like a burn victim kind of look to it. Liposuction. Silicone injections. So this was not silicone implants. This was taking liquid silicone and shooting it directly into your face, where for a lot of people, it then merged with the tissue and it could never be removed and it would lump and make strange surfaces. And finally, collagen injections, less scary. Now, I give you this long list because when you eventually go back and look at a photograph of poor Jocelyn, you will see everything I just described
One
on
at
her
a
face.
time. I do remember seeing a picture of her before it all started, and she looked like a person.
She was adorable. She was incredibly cute.
Didn't she also, like, because she loved cats so much,
Well,
she
no,
decided
that is not true.
it's not?
No.
Okay.
Here's the story. Jocelyn obviously suffered from body dysmorphia.
Mm.
And whatever it was that triggered it, and here's some of the things that can trigger body dysmorphia: stress, drug use, including and very specifically the use of ecstasy. Not my experience.
How do you know
How do I know?
that it didn't cause body dysmorphia?
Mine predated the ecstasy enormously. Don't be
All right,
ridiculous.
just fact check.
And a chemical imbalance, meaning a serotonin deficiency. But there are so many things that can go into it. To this day, no one can point their finger at any one thing, which is why it's still very difficult to treat. But Jocelyn clearly had it. Now, the whole thing about wanting to be Catwoman did not start with Jocelyn. Remember how she decided to be a pilot and a big game hunter to catch a man?
Okay.
He liked cats.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So he was really obsessed with big cats. And to
Oh,
keep her
God.
man interested, Jocelyn decided to become more and more cat like in her appearance. And the ways that that happened were silicone cheek implants and eye lifts to tilt the shape of the eye. I don't know if I've talked about this on this podcast, but when I graduated from law school, my third year of law school was 1995, and then 1996 was my first year out. I worked for a very small boutique law firm that focused on women's health. This particular law firm handled many claimants in the silicone implant class action lawsuit. And I was responsible, because I spoke French, for all of the French speaking women who were part of the class action that was being handled by this firm. It was the most harrowing experience every day. Medical photographs
Oh,
coming
God.
in
Oh,
and
my.
seeing this and the
Mm.
crying. And it was, I'm 25 years old and I can barely like tie my own shoes. So this was horrific. The silicone going into her face, I know what's happening there. And that is bleeding into her tissue. Even when it's not injected, the implants were such early phase implants that there was never the opportunity to take them out. It was only, what are we going to do now that it's there? But Jocelyn didn't want to back down.
Yeah,
That body
she went all
dysmorphia,
in.
she went all in and wanted to be more and more attractive to Alec. She pursued multiple surgeries that would reshape her cheekbones, lift the eye, make her into a cat. She wanted to be a tiger, a cheetah, a lion, whatever would keep Alec's interest. There are many plastic surgeons who have speculated on what actually was done to her. So I found Dr. Jerry Chittister, known as Dr. Chitty, who speculated the following list to add to the list that I've already given us: 8 items: multiple facelifts, eyelid lifts, cheek implants, chin implants, dermal filler injections, resurfacing, upper lip lift, nose job. She wanted all of this done not only because Alec liked cats, but because Alec was noted for saying how much he hated old people.
How old is Alec?
Too old. And in 2024, just another note on body dysmorphia and denial. I mean, by the time it was towards the end, boy, did she look. I mean, how she looked at the height of the Catwomanness was glorious compared to the end.
Makes me so
And she
sad.
said she insisted that she had never had anything done, only Botox.
Honey.
But here's what happened with good old Alec. In 1998, Alec, who doesn't like old people, is found in bed by Jocelyn with a 21-year-old model.
Gross.
He said that during the divorce proceedings that he told Jocelyn not to have the surgeries, but that she saw fixing her face as the same thing as fixing a chair, something easily done. He said, you cannot fix your face like it's a chair.
But we know she got a good settlement. Let's move
Well,
on
the
from
divorce,
Alec.
during the divorce, during the settlement, and I'm about to tell you what the settlement was. See, the big question, and this is very much like Michael Jackson and all the people who who have been devastated by plastic surgery. Why didn't anyone stop them?
Yeah.
Who was there who could stop them? Well, one person tried, the judge in their divorce case. And the judge said that she was not allowed to use any of the alimony for further surgeries. And the alimony could be stopped if she continued to use it for her face.
Okay. I
It
don't know
was
how
a
I feel
woman.
about
And
that.
interestingly, it was a woman who said
That's
this.
very patriarchal,
Yes,
though.
that's why I'm saying, interestingly, a woman. The divorce settlement was estimated between 2.5 and 3.8 billion dollars. She got $100 million a year for 13 years. In 2018, Jocelyn Wildenstein filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy,
What?
claiming she had $0 in the bank and tangible assets of $16.39 million against liabilities of $6.38 million.
What happened?
She said that she wasn't getting money from the trust set up after the divorce because the family got in the way, and she got nothing after 2015. My question is, so you didn't save anything? It's a lot of money.
You have to explain to us what you spend all that money on.
Seriously, yes.
Like you that's not
I mean, that's
to dinner every night.
No. How you go through billions?
You can't.
Well,
you gave it away.
You gave it away, you put it in your face, and you're obviously not a well woman. So she filed, but she still was a public figure, amazingly, was still going out. And she was in Paris on December 31st, 2024, in a hotel where she died of a pulmonary embolism.
Okay. Well, she's in Paris.
If you gotta go in Paris. So that is the final word on Jocelyn Wildenstein.
And what's the callback? What was our episode number the last time we discussed Jocelyn?
50.
And it was punch to the face, scalpel to the kisser.
Yes.
Episode 50.
Episode 50. So 84 episodes later, Jocelyn has shuffled off this mortal coil.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. And we have to honor her as one of the, like it or not, great faces of the 80s.
So what's our tie-in?
Okay, it's really tenuous because this was a tough one.
My favorite kinds.
Okay, so on one side of this podcast, we have firebombing.
Yes, we do.
And burns.
Okay.
And on the other side, we have really savage laser resurfacing that makes you look like a burn victim.
Okay. Well, just leave it there.
All right, just leave that on the table. That's the best I can come up with.
Guess how many reviews we have on Apple Podcast? Off the top of your head.
30.
Jessica, we have 79.
Shut up.
And by the way, 5 stars.
I know. I mean, I look at them, but I never scroll backwards. So
my God,
and you know me,
great.
I'm always like, oh, look what's in front of me. Oh, look, that's what's happening right now. That's fabulous.
But this is what I want, Jessica.
You want to reach 100.
I sure as hell do.
I want us to reach 100. So what can we ask of our loyal, wonderful, amazing listeners? How do we ask you to help us get 21? Just 21 more reviews.
That is such a goal. Well, for one thing, next week, I'll announce where we are. Let's all work as a team.
A community.
A community.
The community that we are.
To get that number up to 100. And yeah, it's at 79 now. And hopefully we're going to have a higher number this time next week.
And you know what we can do just to thank people? Because some of the people who write in are really funny, or they're great writers, or they bring something to their review about themselves that's really interesting. We would love to share your reviews on the air. So if you would like us to do that, we're excited to do it.
Yeah. And I always share them on the Instagram.
Please.
We'd love to hear from you.
I love you're so elegant.
In the form of a review.
We'd love to hear from you. I'm like, please just help us. Please.